Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, recently we had a show talking about mifepristone, which is RU486, or more commonly known as the abortion pill. And we want to take a look at how did this abortion pill get into this country? When did it first come about? Who made it, and was it discovered here in America or elsewhere around the world? And how was it that the Bill Clinton administration got it approved in a very hastily fashion? What went on there? Was it all on the up and up, or were the rules bent or broke, or what really went on? Well, today we have with us Dr. Donna J. Harrison. She's the executive director of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. She does a lot of policy and research work also. And we welcome her. We hope that she'll have a lot of answers to give us the historical perspective of how medical abortions, and in particular the abortion pill, came to America. Well, welcome, Dr. Harrison.
Thanks, Brendan. I'm glad to be here.
Dr. Harrison, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, was there first just surgical abortions and then there were medical abortions, or how did this all come about?
Surgical abortions have been around for a long time, and they're kind of an abuse of the idea of surgery, because actually an elective abortion doesn't treat any disease. I mean, pregnancy is not a disease, so to use surgery to treat something that's not a disease doesn't make it medicine. It doesn't make it good practice. So just wanted to say that this is not a treatment for a disease. But people have been using surgical abortion for a long time, as long as we've been able to go inside the uterus and scrape things out. But medical abortion didn't come about until about, probably the 1980s is when mifepristone, this drug RU486 or Mifeprex, all the same thing, when that drug was being developed in France.
And now that was that a French pharmaceutical firm?
Yes, Roussel Cloth was the French pharmaceutical, but that later became a subsidiary of Hoechst, which is a German company.
And they're a German company. And did they want to, once I believe they got it approved in France, what year was that it was approved in France, the French firm?
It was 1990 that the drug was approved in France. But Roussel Cloth did not want any studies in the United States. And they took the position, and I'll quote, "Under no circumstances," unquote, "would it permit a new drug application to be filed with the FDA," because they said that the chairman of Hoechst had officially declared that mifepristone was not compatible with the ethics of the company. Yet they still sold it. But they didn't want to be marketing an abortion drug in the United States.
Well, so they didn't want to market it. Well, then what happened or what pressures came to bear that somehow in a circuitous fashion we've gotten the abortion pill? What were there intermediary steps? So what did Hoechst give up their rights to the RU486?
Yes, what happened was President Clinton was determined to bring this drug to the United States. So President Clinton directed HHS Secretary Donna J to start the testing and to promote the testing and licensing of mifepristone in the United States. And in fact, the United States did fund some developmental research on RU486 through the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, which is a sad irony in itself. But in addition to that, President Clinton wrote to Hoechst and asked Hoechst, the company, to file an NDA file a new drug application with the FDA. Now, that's never happened before, that a president asks a pharmaceutical company to file a drug application with the Food and Drug Administration. And something that you have to understand is that the Food and Drug Administration is directly under the Department of Health and Human Services. And the Department of Health and Human Services is under the President. So the FDA is kind of under a tremendous amount of pressure to carry out the wishes of the administrative office. And that puts it in a very scientifically compromised position with President Clinton actively intervening to bring this drug to the United States. It would be very, very difficult for the FDA to do an objective evaluation of that drug, considering the pressure that was coming down from on high.
Well, now, somehow it ended up in the Cayman Islands, which I always thought was a tax shelter for people who made a lot of money. The Cayman Islands. How did it go from France, or did Hoyt give up their rights to the Mifeprex, or
yes? Well,
what happened there?
Decided that it was not going to market this drug in the United States. So, under more pressure from the Clinton administration, the hoaxed signed an agreement which essentially transferred without any money the patent rights for mifepristone to the Population Council. Well, the Population Council is basically the research arm of Planned Parenthood, and the Population Council doesn't manufacture or distribute drugs. So they made another company called Danco. Well, Danco doesn't manufacture or distribute drugs, but Danco was incorporated in the Cayman Islands, so that if there were any big lawsuits, then Danco wouldn't be able to be touched because it isn't incorporated in the United States. Danco doesn't manufacture or distribute drugs, so they contracted with Hualin Pharmaceuticals in China. And it turns out that pharmaceutical company was actually put under a disciplinary action by the FDA because of its lack of quality in some other drug manufacturing. But that's who actually manufactured the drug that Danco distributed for years. Now, who is currently manufacturing the drug, I don't know. But I will say that Danco Laboratories is the distributor, but actually the Population Council holds the patent rights for that drug, for mifepristone.
So as holding the patent rights, then, are they getting in some sub rosa fashion financial remuneration then?
Well, they own the drug.
They own, well.
And they created Danco, so it doesn't take much to pierce the corporate veil here.
I see. Now, Clinton, I noticed in the footnotes of some stuff that I read here, there was a woman by the name of Dr. Susan Allen, and she worked at American Health Technologies, and all of a sudden looks like she had rapid increase in her position in the Food and Drug Administration. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, Susan Allen was appointed to the FDA during this time when the FDA was showing a little reluctance in approving this drug. But of course, she what's called recused herself from any of the decision making. However, it's pretty obvious that somebody who was so actively involved in bringing mifepristone to the United States could exert some pressure on colleagues to approve this drug, and it's an interesting promotion there.
And then I noticed now the Clinton administration, I think, went through the year 2000, but in March 18th of 1996, the FDA initially quoted the drug a standard review, but all of a sudden, 2 months later, or less than 2 months later, they got an accelerated priority review. How does that happen?
Well,
I mean, how do they get to skip the whole FDA process? It doesn't.
Well, it's like I said, the FDA is under HHS, and HHS is under the executive office. So if the Clinton administration wanted that drug approved, it's pressured for the approval of that drug, and it interfered with FDA's normal process. So the FDA was basically directed to approve the drug, and the FDA was in a hard spot okay? Here's a drug that's dangerous. It is not proven effective. The research behind effective and safe, I should say. The research behind it was very shoddy. It was not double-blind, placebo-controlled trials as it was supposed to be, and yet the FDA is told, you got to approve this drug. So what they did, yes, it was an expedited approval, but actually what happened was the FDA said, man, what are we going to do? We got to approve this drug. What controls can we put on this drug if we have to approve it? And they did actually a pretty smart thing. They approved it under a special consideration called CFR 314.5, which is called Subpart H. And the reason they approved it under this Subpart H, which is the expedited approval, is that Subpart H was the only law that they had that would allow them to provide some kind of restriction on the use of the drug in order to assure that it would minimize the risk of this drug. Okay, so they recognize this is a dangerous drug. If we let it out willy-nilly, women are going to get hurt and they're going to die. So what can we do to minimize the effect of what we're being commanded to do? And that's why it was approved under Subpart H, because Subpart H says that it allows for the approval of drugs which need post-marketing restrictions in order to assure safe use. Okay, that's a really important point, because what happened after the drug was approved is that Danco and Planned Parenthood threw off all the FDA restrictions. They are not giving it according to the FDA protocol at all. They're giving it however they want to give it. They're experimenting on women, and this is really bad. Now, it's part of the responsibility of the FDA. They really should not have approved it without mifepristone meeting all of the requirements that any other drug should have met. But I will have to say that at least the FDA did recognize this is a dangerous drug, and they did put in place what little restrictions that they could. And it's important that right now, at this point in history, that states make sure that at the very least, mifepristone is given according to the FDA protocol. It's very important for the safety of women in those states.
But isn't that protocol being abused by pretty much all the practitioners who hand out these abortion pills, both mifepristone and misoprostol? Is that how you say it?
Misoprostol.
Misoprostol,
yes.
pardon me.
Or misoprostol.
I mean, that's part of the protocol, those two different types of pills?
Yes, that is part of the protocol. The FDA protocol was that the mifepristone, the first drug, would be given when the patient would come in for her appointment. And then 2 days later, the patient would return to get misoprostol or misoprostol. And that patient would take the misoprostol by mouth, and then most women would actually abort within 4 to 6 hours after taking the misoprostol. Not all of them, but most of them. So the reason for having the woman come in for the second visit was so that they could see, does she even need the misoprostol? Because you've got about 5 or 10% of women, depending on the study, who will miscarry right after taking the mifepristone. And not miscarry, they will abort right after taking the mifepristone. So she comes in for that second visit to see, does she even need the misoprostol? And if she does, then she's given it in a place where she could get pain medicine, because most women need some significant amount of pain medicine, including narcotic pain medicine, for this process. So in France, where it was first approved, these were done in a clinical situation where women could actually be observed and treated. But now what's happened in the United States is women are given the mifepristone, and then they're sent home with the misoprostol. They may not take it correctly. They may abort in the elevator. They may abort in the car. Who knows where these women will be aborting, and may not be in a situation where they have pain control or someone who can help them. It's really kind of an abusive situation for women. It makes much more sense. I mean, if someone were going to say what is compassion for the woman here, it makes much more sense to follow the FDA protocol than it does to simply send her out with a second drug and not ensure that she's in a safe place when she actually passes her baby.
And isn't there supposed to be in the FDA protocol a third visit?
The third visit is to make sure that she actually did pass the fetus in the placenta, pass the baby in the placenta. So that third visit is when she comes in a week or 2 weeks after taking the misoprostol to check and see is she still pregnant, because there are women that are still pregnant after taking the mifepristone and misoprostol. And the problem is, I mean, not only is there an abuse of how the drugs are given, there's also an abuse of the limit that the FDA put on using this drug. The FDA put a very strict limit of being not more than 7 weeks. 7 weeks from the first day of the last menstrual period. So that means when a woman misses her period, the FDA protocol allows 3 weeks after she misses her period for her to be able to take the mifepristone and misoprostol drug combination. If you go beyond that to 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, they're using it way beyond that. The further you go beyond that, the higher the rate that this procedure will fail. And when this procedure fails, that is when the woman fails to completely pass the fetus in the placenta, she can hemorrhage, and she can significantly hemorrhage. In fact, in the clinical trials in the United States, there was one woman who just about died from a massive hemorrhage. And when the researchers were questioned about that, they said, "Oh, well, there's no unexpected complications." What a statement. Yeah, that's right. There were no unexpected complications in the trials because they expect that a certain number of women will almost hemorrhage to death. Hemorrhage is one of the biggest problems, and the further you are, the further along in pregnancy you are, the higher the risk of hemorrhage. And that's why the FDA limited it to just 49 days.
I see.
After the first day of the last menstrual period, which means basically 3 weeks after you miss your period. If you're further along than that, you have a much higher risk that you'll hemorrhage, that you'll leave tissue inside and need a DNC, need surgery to complete the removal of tissue, and a higher risk that your baby will continue to live, but now exposed to the second drug, misoprostol. And the second drug, misoprostol, is known to deform babies. It causes birth defects. So that second drug, misoprostol, is a really nasty drug.
Oh, that's really something. Now, let me ask you a two-part question. First is, while the Clinton administration was trying to use these hurry-up techniques and rush techniques, was the pro-life movement aware of all this, and were they trying to battle the Clinton administration during this time?
Oh, my. Yes, we were. I was there at the filing of the very first citizen petition to stop this, which was filed in 1995. And it was filed when we first got word of the potential filing of the new drug application. That is, we got word that the FDA was going to try to approve this. So Americans United for Life filed that along with Concerned Women for America, and I was there at the launch of it. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the FDA dismissed that petition on a technicality. They said, "Oh, you filed it before we actually got the new drug application in. So we're going to dismiss your concerns," even though it was a compilation of the world's research on RU486 at the time, with the concerns that there would be a lot of hemorrhage and infection, which in fact there are. So the FDA just simply ignored that. They dismissed it on a technicality. So my organization, American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, got together with Concerned Women for America, and we filed a second citizen petition in 2002. 100 pages, 500 references. We documented all of our concerns. And the FDA received comment back from Population Council And we commented on the Population Council, and the Population Council commented on ours, and the FDA chose to do something that that is one way of not answering the question. That is, they ignored the whole thing. They never responded to the petition. They never addressed any of the concerns. They just simply filed it and never addressed it. And because the FDA is under the executive office, the FDA doesn't have to do anything with our petition. And unfortunately, the current executive office is ideologically committed to abortion at any cost, at any price, including taxpayer-funded. And as you know from the whole the whole controversy surrounding the Affordable Care Act, they want even people who don't believe in abortion to have to pay for other people's abortions. This administration is not one that will do anything with that citizen petition that we had filed. But it still is sitting on the desk of the FDA, and our concerns are still valid. We are very concerned that this is a dangerous drug, and that that Danco and Planned Parenthood are using it in ways that the FDA specifically prohibited because of the approval under the restricted distribution clause. So we're still very concerned about the abuses going on. It just may be not the right time in history for us to get an FDA that is equally concerned about these risks to American women.
Well, between the Clinton and the Obama administration, there was a Republican administration, George W. Bush, and he was pro-life. Could he have turned the tide on this approval by this hurry-up approval by the FDA on RU 486?
Well, that is a very interesting question. We did file our citizen petition during a friendly administration, but my understanding is that there was enough political pressure that the FDA chose not to respond to our petition, even though privately I know that they acknowledged that our concerns were valid, but for political reasons they chose not to respond. And I don't know what to say about the administration that was in power during that time. We certainly gave them plenty of information, and their lack of action is something that does really demand an explanation. Mm-hmm.
All right. Very interesting. Well, what is the answer, or can say a Republican administration that is pro-life? A lot of the candidates getting into the presidential race seem to be pro-life. If they were to be elected in 2016, what could be done to bring pressure on them to try to reverse this RU 486 and the medical abortions, which are taking up an increasing percentage of the overall abortions? Is there any way to turn back the clock, or to just stop the medical abortions so that women aren't hurt and possibly killed by using mifepristone in the future?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think probably the most important thing that we can do is inform women of risks. Women don't need to be managed. They need to be informed. And I think most women don't know about the risks to a mifepristone abortion. And most women aren't actually told that the drug regimen that they're being used is the drug regimen that's being used on them is experimental. What they're being told is, this is the way we do it here. Sign this form, which actually gives the FDA protocol, but then the women are not given the drugs according to the FDA protocol. So it's really a mess. And a FDA with integrity needs to look at that mess and say, this is a mess. Let's do the whole thing right. If you want to look at this drug, look at it as what it is. It's not a medicine that treats any life-threatening condition. It's not a medicine that treats any disease. So what in the world are we doing approving a drug to kill human beings? This is, again, the whole idea of abortion being something that's a medical procedure needs to be rethought because abortion is a attempt at using surgery or a drug to solve a social problem, and it's not the treatment of a disease. So I think what we need to do is rethink the whole thing, and I think we need a new FDA to actually look at and enforce the restrictions that they originally placed on this drug, because they placed them for very good reasons.
I see. Well, Dr. Harrison, thank you so much for coming on today and explaining from a historical perspective how did RU 486, or the medical abortion, come to be in our country under the Clinton administration, and what the effects are, and how basically medical protocol is being totally forgotten or not really followed whatsoever when it comes to this particular activity. And we really appreciate your educating the public. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Brendan.
Mm-hmm. We hope you learned a lot today. And we'll tune in next week when we have another interesting guest. This is an area that is of great concern, and to see that how this came to be in our country, where hundreds of thousands of people are being killed by medical abortions in this country, it's something that really needs to be looked at seriously. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.